Today I am going to read you a book that I really love. This is by one of my favorite authors, Tommy DePaola. When you look at the cover of this book, what do you think it's about? The title of this story is The Quilt Story. You can see on the bed there's a beautiful quilt. Before I read this story, I want to sing the schema song because this book reminds me of a few other books that we have read together previously. We read these together at school. These books remind me of this book. I made a connection between these two books. We try to make connections either before we read because I am sharing my connections with you, or maybe while we're reading, you're going to make your own connections. So let's sing the schema song together. So the song goes, schema, 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 what I know, watch it grow. I can make connections, meaningful connections, text to self, text to text, text to world. So the connections that I'm making right now are text to text, book to book. So this book, The Quilt Story, reminds me of Joseph Had a Little Overcoat and also Something from Nothing. These books are about the grandpa who first made a blanket, then he made a jacket, then he made a vest. Each time he started with a really, really big piece of fabric when he made the blanket, then he made the jacket a little bit smaller, then he made the vest a little bit smaller. Then he made a handkerchief and a button and then smaller and smaller. But he was always reusing and recycling. And that is why these books remind me of this book, The Quilt Story. The Quilt Story by Tony Johnston and Tommy DePaola. The Quilt Story. You can see the quilt. It says Abigail stitched into the quilt. A little girl's mother made the quilts to keep her warm when the snow came down, long ago. She stitched the quilt by a yellow flame, humming all the time. She stitched the tails of falling stars, and she stitched the name Abigail. You can see there's the mom in this picture. She's sewing the blanket. You can see the snow piling up in the window. And you know, if you notice the falling stars in this blanket, you notice it's the same falling stars in this picture. And the mother stitched the name Abigail. Abigail loved the quilt. She wrapped it around her in the quiet dark and watched the winter skies. Sometimes she even saw a falling star. It almost looks like a shooting star. Sometimes Abigail played in the woods near her home. She had tea, she had her dolls to tea, and the quilt had tea all over it. I see Abigail and I see this stain right here from the tea that she spilled. But it still, to me, looks like a lovely tea party. Sometimes she pretended the quilt was a gown. She wore it to town on her horse. Clop, clop, clop. She looks like a princess or a warrior riding that horse. Her mother stitched it up when it tore. Sometimes she played hide and seek with her sisters. She laughed and cried. Don't peek! She hid under the quilt. Everyone still found her. Looks like even the cat knew where she was. Sometimes Abigail was sick. She sneezed and sneezed. Then she slept under the quilt. She felt better. One day, Abigail's family moved away, across wide rivers and over a rock-hard trail. These look like 1, 2, 3 covered wagons. The quilt came with them, not stuffed into trunks with the blankets and clothes. It kept the little girls warm from the wild winds, warm from the rain, and warm during the sparkling nights. They decided to build a new house in the woods. Abigail's father built it with his hatchet. Chop, chop, chop. He built her a new bed. Chip, chip, chip. He made her a new horse, too. He worked until curly shavings covered the floor, and everyone sneezed and said, "Welcome home." Everyone was glad. But Abigail felt sad. See, he made her a rocking horse and everything, but Abigail still felt sad. New house, new horse, new bed. Everything smelled of fresh chops and chips. Everything but the quilt. That was the only thing she still had from her home from before. So her mother rocked her as mothers do. Then she tucked her in, and Abigail felt at home again underneath the quilt. One day, when the quilt was very old and very loved, Abigail folded it carefully and put it in the attic. Everyone forgot it was there. A gray mouse came and loved the quilt. Her babies were born on top of it. They grew fat and gray in the warm stuffing, and then they got hungry. They ate one of the falling stars. Then a raccoon came and loved the quilt. She dug a hole in the corner with her black paws and hid an apple inside. Then a cat came and loved the quilt, a patchwork cat. It rolled on the stars, and stuffing spilled out like snow. Then the cat curled up on the new snow pile and purred. She's still cuddling with that old quilt, though. Kitty, kitty, called a new little girl. She found a new cat. And then she found the quilt, splashed with patterns of sun. Is this Abigail? No, it's not Abigail. It's a different person. It looks like her, but it's a different person. The little girl wrapped the quilt around her, and she loved it too. Can you make it like new? She asked her mother. Can you fix it for me, Mama? So her mother patched all of the holes, she pushed fresh stuffing in, and she stitched long tails on each one of the stars to swish across the quilt again. One day, this girl's family moved away across miles and miles of pavement and snaking gray highways. This was a lot of time later, but it's the same story. They still had to move away. They found a new house, freshly cleaned, freshly waxed, freshly painted. All of it was painted white. They unpacked and unpacked all night long, and everyone sneezed on cardboard dust and said, "Welcome home," and was glad. But the little girl, she still felt sad. Everything smelled of white paint and boxes. Everything but the quilt. So her mother rocked her as mothers do, and then she tucked her in, and she felt at home again, underneath the quilt. So my friends, when I read this story, I wonder about what's a time when you recycled something or reused something. Maybe a cousin or an older sibling has given you something of theirs that they don't need anymore, and then you reused it and you loved it just as much as they did. That means that that item was not thrown in the garbage, but instead someone else enjoyed it for a second time, if not then a third or fourth time. My friends, please share something with me where you have reused or recycled. If you're having trouble thinking of a time when you've done this, think about when we did our box challenge. I remember a lot of the kids in our class coming up with a fantastic creation using only recycled materials. I know that there are plenty of times in your life when you have either reused or recycled an object and made something new. Tell me about that. I would love to hear. Thank you for watching this video. Bye for now.